is slightly unfair because it's a very different album. The thing about Desire is that it's a very commercial album. Dylan went out of his way to make an album that sounds enjoyable to listen to and to make, you know, and he's trying different styles and themes that he hasn't done for a long time. Obviously, there's a couple of long ballads of outlaws and rogues that he's celebrating in there, and he's using a co-lyricist for the first time on any kind of extended basis with Jacques Levy. So there's a lot to celebrate about the album.
I think that sound he gets is a real freewheeling, gypsy sort of sound to it. Intriguing stuff, songs like Isis he did with Jacques Levy, some really intriguing images. Romance and Durango, again, that Pat Garrett feel to it. It's got Sarah on it, which is a lovely, lovely love song to his wife. I think he's really trying to do something different musically on it as well. I think that the violin and the guitar and just all sorts of different permutations, Emmylou Harris. I think it's a really undervalued record in his career.
Scarlett, in particular, was given prominence on the final mix, her violin as integral as Dylan's harmonica.
I distinctly remember being in the studio, going back to, knowing, having listened to him prior to this, huge meeting that ended up, in a recording studio with him, and really loving his music prior to that, knowing the role his harmonica played. So of course, when we came to the harmonica solo, I put the violin down, and he looked at me and said, "Keep playing." I went, "Oh." So I kept playing, and evidently he muted the harmonica later, in some cases, or he put them together. So no, it was a huge revelation to me. Yeah.
Everything about the approach was different from what he'd done previously, and the sort of gypsy flavor to her playing also really set it off. The fact that she played in a very simple blues-type way instead of any fancy violin stuff or the stock old country licks that you hear all the time. It was an interesting and romantic, mysterious element that it lent to the songs.
I was overwhelmed, really, that I ended up being that prominent, and our relationship really was wonderful right from the beginning. There was a real chemistry and a real connection. And I just felt also that he was kind of, lifting me up, deliberately and by choice for some reason. And, he just saw whatever he saw in me, and whatever he heard in the playing was something that really moved him in such a way that was quite astounding to me, and I wouldn't have expected it.
In April, the second leg of the Rolling Thunder Revue began, this time focusing on the Bible Belt and the southern half of America. Despite the fact that Desire was such a hit, the atmosphere was not as magical as before.
When the tour cranked up for the second time in early '76, the second Rolling Thunder Revue tour, we not only had the thrill of doing a Bob Dylan tour, but the thrill of being a group that had done a hit record. Of course, the Rolling Thunder Revue was more exciting the first time around because it was new. The second time, it needed a little bit of a boost because it had already been done. And also, we were doing it in an area of the country where Bob's fan base wasn't as rabid as it was in the Northeast, where he had done the first leg of the tour.
There was quite a dynamic change. I can't really put my finger on it, but there was some kind of interdynamic change within the band and with him, or with him with us. And there were other you know, personal problems that started emerging that sort of spilled into the band, I believe.
Yeah, I could definitely feel that Bob wasn't as into it. The novelty of touring with the Revue had definitely worn off after the first tour. And also the ticket sales weren't as good for the second leg. And at the same time, I think the fact that Bob wasn't making a lot of money was starting to get to him. During rehearsal, we had heard that Foulkes had died. And meanwhile, he had been turned down for the tour. He's one of the people who sort of auditioned for it and could have really used the break, and ended up not making the cut. And he killed himself. And perhaps that was his last, I've often wondered if maybe that had been Phil's last hope at a lifeline, is getting that to rejuvenate his career. But it didn't work out that way for Phil.
When the tour ended, Dylan took some much-needed time out. In November, however, he stepped onto stage again for the farewell concert of the band. Known as the Last Waltz, it was expertly captured by maverick New York director Martin Scorsese in his film of the same name.
Dylan's job was to go out there and perform, which he did exceptionally well. I thought it was a beautiful performance. And also, I think he was very photogenic at that time as well for the film. And there's a story that he had a clash with Neil Diamond. As Neil Diamond walked off, he said something to Dylan about "follow that," and Dylan said, "What do I have to do? Walk on and fall asleep." No, a great performance, and a good performance by many of the artists as well. I mean, it was a very, very good lineup, I think.
And I come home with you, baby, can I come home with you? Well, I'll do anything in this God Almighty world if you just let me come home with you.
1977 was a quiet year for Dylan publicly, but privately it was one of the hardest of his life. Divorce proceedings began with his estranged wife Sarah, and while ensnared in this emotional and legal mess, Dylan set to work cutting Ronaldo and Clara. At the close of 1977, Dylan had the film finished and began preparations for a new tour. Again, Rob Stoner was called.
I never expected to hear from him again. I figured that the Rolling Thunder was a finite thing, and since I knew he wasn't having too good a time on the second leg of it, I figured that I was associated with Rolling Thunder, and that was that. So I was very surprised when he called me up in '77. I think it was late fall of '77, and told me that he wanted me to come out to LA with a few musicians and put together a new band to do a world tour. I was knocked out, flattered and surprised that he called me a second time.
In January 1978, while Dylan prepared for the tour, Ronaldo and Clara was released to terrible reviews. With its extended running time and impenetrable yet pretentious symbolism, it disappeared, having only played 3 American cities.
The reaction to the film was very poor, especially in America. I mean, it got very good reviews at the Cannes Film Festival, and it did run for 3 months in cinemas in London. But certainly, generally, and especially in the States, the reception was very bad towards the film. Whether people couldn't understand it or didn't want to understand it, you know, is an argument. But also, I think there were several reviews that stated the fact that you know, Dylan was trying to portray himself as Jesus Christ, and it got panned really very badly. And clearly, you know, Dylan lost a lot of money on the film.
Well, I remember when it opened in London in 1977, 78, and I thought, oh,